Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stoliarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon of March 26th, 2023. Today we have a fascinating conversation in store for you in regard to healthy longevity and what we can do to extend our healthy lifespans to make sure that we reach the advent of longevity escape velocity in the best possible condition. We have an illustrious panel of our U.S. Transhumanist Party officers joining us today, including our Director of Visual Art and Vice Chairman for the next 4 months, Art Ramon Garcia, our Legislative Director, Jason Geringer, our Director of Longevity Outreach, Ben Ballweg, our Director of Applied Innovation, David Shoemaker, our Director of Publication, Zach Richardson, and our special guest for today is Danielle Ruiz, who is the CEO, Medical Director, and adult-gerontology nurse practitioner at Everest Health Partners. She is also a Fellow of Geriatric Medical Research and Medical Director at the Methuselah Foundation. She has worked with the Methuselah Foundation to develop the Methuselah Protocol, which is a series of safe and effective methods to help people become measurably younger and maintain their youth and health longer. The protocol was developed after poring over hundreds of thousands of research papers, and it includes a variety of interventions and behaviors to enhance longevity, lower mortality, prevent diseases of aging, improve health outcomes, and optimize health. So welcome, Danielle. We're very pleased to have you with us today, and please feel free to begin with your presentation.
Thanks so much. I'm happy to be here. So thank you so much for the beautiful intro as well. I suppose maybe a little bit of background about me. I've enjoyed working with the aged for a long time, even since I was a kid. It was just a pleasure for me to learn from their wisdom and get to know them. And so I went into the medical field because of that. And unfortunately, over the 10 years that I was a nurse, I found that there was really very little I could do besides just providing comfort and physical care, which is what motivated me to go back to school so that I could make a more meaningful difference and initially go into research as a fellow with the Methuselah Foundation. So the last couple of years or so, I continued to work as a fellow with the Methuselah Foundation, but we've been starting to bring that Methuselah Protocol to the public to make those interventions available. As things continue to progress, we're going to have a lot more options, hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years. Hopefully we get even more options 100 years from now until the point that we do reach the longevity escape velocity and live forever, ideally. But in the meantime, we want to live well and optimize our health and stay young as long as we can, enjoy our lives. So really to that point, most people don't really want to live a really long time in ill health. Most people want to maximize the time on earth that is healthy, that they're able to engage with others, they're able to feel productive, fulfilled, learn new things, experience new things, and get enjoyment out of life. And to accomplish that, we need to make sure that we maintain our health and reach an optimal state of health. We want more years that we're really thriving. Many clients come to me, they already have disease. We want to reverse that disease. We want to halt or slow the progression of aging to the level that we can today. And we really want to just avoid any issues. A lot of times when a person encounters something like COVID, it starts a tumble-down effect where they just continue to get sick. They have more stress on their body. It's a lot easier for them to have medical problems. Same thing with diabetes or obesity. It's really any onslaught that the body faces puts more stress on it. It makes it more likely for us to have other issues. So to accomplish that, we need to be in a healthy state. We want to prevent disease, and of course, we need to treat disease if it's already there. And of course, it's not just like for us personally, for our loved ones, to reduce the pain, the suffering, but it also helps the economy. It also helps, philosophically, it helps society. We don't want to lose the wisdom, the generational knowledge either. So we talked about the Methuselah Protocol in the intro, just briefly. We use a combination of methods to measurably improve quality of life, as well as the age of an individual. Anything is on the table as long as it is safe, it is evidence-based, meaning it is research proven, and it's individualized to each person. Everybody needs something different. Not everyone is, a 42-year-old female. Everybody comes from a different background, has different individual risks, family history risks. And so that Methuselah Protocol is adjusted to each specific person. So generally speaking, when an individual comes to me, there's different categories of clients. There are people who are very familiar with longevity medicine. There are some people who literally don't even know what that word is defined as. And of course, there's other individuals who are already taking rapamycin, who are doing the best that they can given the options. There's clients who prefer only natural or lifestyle interventions, individuals who are more comfortable with mainstream medicine, and people who are willing to take a little bit of risk and the potential for some side effects to have a really big payoff in improving their health. Some people prefer to do, little changes at a time. Other ones prefer to just kind of take a bite off and do everything at once. And this is also part of where things are individualized. We also do a really in-depth planning for how that protocol is going to be implemented for each person, because everybody is different in terms of what will keep them motivated and sticking to a program that will work in the long term. Same thing when individuals are coming to me, they're very young, then that's great. We have the great option, the opportunity to limit the effect of aging. Prevention is always easier. But even if someone is already aged, then there's a lot we can do. It takes maybe a little bit more effort, a little bit more time to get to that point of reversing their age, reversing their disease, but it's still possible. So, I created here a few different categories of patients to give you guys some examples. Bill is based on a patient that I have who's a very, very nice individual. He's very familiar with longevity. He had already been kind of self-experimenting for a long time, but he wasn't really noticing much significant difference. So he would, try a supplement and have a positive effect for a couple of weeks, and then it would wear off. He would try something else. And he was starting to really see the effects of aging. He told me that when he was about 68, he kind of hit a cliff and was starting to kind of collect comorbid diseases. So we started a combination of prescription medications used off-label, as well as really in-depth lifestyle changes, and it was pretty phenomenal. So maybe like 3 or 4 months later, his prostate had shrunk, his diabetes had gone to not even a pre-diabetic state. His mood was much better. He didn't have any hypertension anymore, and that was even without like off-label medications specific for hypertension. So we were really, really happy with those results. That's been a couple years now, and he's still progressing. Usually with clients, they'll have a really, really momentous improvement in their health in that first month, 6 months, year. And then we kind of reach a plateau or a slow improvement, and we're just trying to keep things from sliding backwards. We already kind of went over his Methuselah Protocol for him. Another example patient is a premenopausal female, but kind of reaching menopause. She had a lot of issues with autoimmune disease, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, so nerve irritation. She had some chronic reproductive illnesses as well, and she was already on a lot of medications. So for her, we really needed to kind of back off of some of the medications that were causing problems, and then optimize what would actually make a big difference for her. So for her, we took off some medications that were causing some problems, added in some supplements that were safe, that would help with her immune system, help with her mood, help with her overall inflammation. And she's been doing great. This client came to me. She was having to take like 2 days off of work every week because of her chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. And she hasn't had to take a day off work in the last like 4 months. It's been pretty fantastic. And then this client is based off of an individual who is an athlete. He's a cyclist. Of course, that came with some injuries. He didn't really have much of a plan individually. He tried to work on his lifestyle, but he wasn't taking any supplements, any medications. And he was pretty concerned mainly with optimizing his athletic performance and staving off family history issues. He had a lot of family history of cancers, of dementia, of heart disease. So for him, we optimized his lifestyle. Some things that he was doing, he thought would be really beneficial, like a keto diet. But for an athlete, in his case, that was not particularly helpful for him. And of course, with his family history of hypertension, the FH stands for family history and the PH stands for personal history. In that case, that wouldn't be a great option for him. So we tried to bring in a lot more antioxidants, a lot more vegetable matter, high nutrition, micro and macronutrient foods, while also helping to fuel his body. We upped his carbohydrate intake significantly, which he responded to very, very well. He had some issues with uric acid, with his kidneys. He was starting to have high blood pressure, even though he was exercising so much. So we did a bit more of an extensive supplement stack for him. He didn't want any prescription medications. So we also optimized his cross training for his athletic performance. We've actually added in and removed a couple of different things in the stack since then. So sometimes we'll recheck labs at about 6 months and see where we then need to fine tune. So, I mean, really with patients, it's pretty phenomenal. The first month or so, it takes a lot of effort for an individual to kind of get used to the new protocol, which is where the coaching comes in and is really helpful. But usually by the first couple months, people are really starting to see results. And by 6 months, even the blood work shows phenomenal results. Actually, since the conference in Dublin where Kennedy and I were together, I have another client who came with wildly uncontrolled diabetes. She was at the level where she probably should have been on 3 oral medications and insulin, like really, really horrible. But we decided to take on the risk of holding off on prescription medications for 3 months. She hadn't been taking them for years anyways. So we said, okay, let's take a moment. Let's really, really work on lifestyle and the supplements. And like literally a month in, which really isn't much time for the body to adjust, she was able to less than halve her fasting glucose, which usually would take probably 6 months to do with prescription medications. And the really important thing is that she didn't have any side effects with it. She didn't have any lightheadedness. She didn't have any low blood sugar episodes. So, I mean, if you're able to accomplish something safely and have better effect, then I mean, it makes sense to me. It seems to make sense. So that's my little presentation. I just thought you might want a little background.
Yes. Thank you very much, Danielle, for that presentation. And indeed, it is quite inspiring what you are able to do with patients to help improve their health from whatever baseline that they are starting at. And I'm sure our audience and our panel will have a lot of questions for you about specific ways to improve health. I would like to ask in regard to a common condition now, unfortunately, that afflicts about 1 in 5 Americans, which is long COVID. Long COVID can manifest itself in a variety of ways, including in previously healthy people, young people, people who followed all of the correct lifestyle advice. And I'm wondering if you have had experience with patients who have had long COVID and how you have been able to help them, in particular to prevent other health issues from accumulating, which you noted as a risk.
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually the example patient who had the chronic fatigue and the fibromyalgia, I mean, she already knew that she had chronic fatigue because she had Epstein-Barr virus, but there's also the question on her end that she may have had long COVID. She wasn't having repeated COVID tests coming up. She wasn't having fever, but she absolutely worsened after having COVID. There's a lot of supplements out there. There's some that are effective and some that are not, some that are safe and some that are not. But there are absolutely supplements that can help with long COVID. Speaking generally, this is not medical advice because everyone is individual. Some that are particularly good would be the combination of CoQ10 and acetylcysteine. And then boosting energy in indirect ways, like with a high quality B complex and like Panax ginseng would also be helpful. Like you were saying, exercise really helps. So sometimes people will need a little bit of a boost, even if it's not a long-term thing, just to kind of get them back in those healthy lifestyle habits that will allow their body to start kind of healing itself. And exercise that's a huge, huge lifestyle factor in so many ways.
Yes, indeed. And actually, after about 6 months of long COVID, once I have gone through all of the cardiac screenings, which indicated no permanent damage, I decided essentially I ran out of interventions or diagnostic tests that the conventional medical system could offer me. So the only thing I could do is resume my normal pre-COVID lifestyle, and that included running every day between 3 and 8 miles. And I noticed my heart rate during exercise normalized to a great extent. My resting heart rate became typical of what it was during my pre-COVID days. So there is a lot of value, if one can rule out permanent organ damage, to just trying to resume a normal, healthy lifestyle and prevent other issues. So thank you very much in regard to that. And I'm also curious with regard to lifestyle-based ways to reduce blood pressure, because as you pointed out, this could happen also with athletic people for whatever reason. And what did you notice in terms of factors that could increase blood pressure in people, including otherwise healthy people, and habits that could help reduce it?
Yeah, oh, that's a good one. So, I mean, high blood pressure affects an enormous amount of the population. It seems to be that certain populations, certain ethnic backgrounds, certain genetic makeups have a much higher tendency toward high cholesterol, high blood pressure, diabetes. I mean, they're certainly very genetic. The control of blood pressure is very complicated, which to me is very fun in the body. It's controlled by your brain, it's controlled by your kidneys, it's controlled by your blood vessels. It's very complicated. But there's a couple of hormones that your kidneys produce that seem to be the most common things that go wrong, which is why blood pressure medications, the most common, most effective ones, control those two hormones. Keeping kidneys healthy is really important. That's also a challenge. If you have high blood pressure, that's usually the first organ that starts to have problems. Alcohol is another one. For some individuals, the day after they have an alcoholic beverage, their blood pressure will be excessively low or excessively high. So personal tracking is really important. Dehydration, exercise also. So sometimes people will have an underlying cardiac issue that causes their blood pressure to respond in an erratic way or in a way that doesn't make sense with what their body is trying to accomplish. So, further screening is sometimes really helpful, getting more blood work, getting more cardiac screening if we just, aren't seeing any legitimate reason for high blood pressure.
Yes, thank you for that. And definitely a lot of possible avenues to explore for people who might be concerned about that. Now, Zach, I know you have some questions, so feel free to go ahead.
Sure. So diabetes is a big one. How many of these, previously we've had one of our guests was Simon Waslander, who developed the augmented fasting protocol that has to do basically with fasting and then taking little bit of like olive oil, vitamin D and stuff. But have you considered with any of your patients trying something a little more drastic and doing like a fast for a little bit? Because I know that can just drastically bring down average blood sugar levels.
Yeah, absolutely. Fasting is really, really fantastic. I do a 24 or 48-hour fast at least once a month, and then an extended fast like once a year. Trying to maintain weight, not letting it get too low is important also, and it's not appropriate for everyone by any means. But a medically observed fast is fantastic, not just for blood sugar, not just for cholesterol, not just for weight either. Not really a great way to lose weight, but it does often happen. But also for immune system. So an extended water fast is really fantastic in replenishing pancreatic beta cells and also replenishing the immune cells in the gut. It's one of the greatest ways. Also, a little known fact, when you fast for an extended period of time, usually it hits around 48, 78, 72 hours, your human growth hormone spikes by like 10 times. But that's much safer than like supplementing with human growth hormone, which is not something your body is producing by itself, controlling the levels. So actually, I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? Like if you can't go out and find food, but you desperately need it to survive, then you're going to have mechanisms that allow you to survive. You're not just going to like lay down and pass out and die. So after those first couple of days, these incredible mechanisms turn on and tell your body you have like so much more energy, you have so much more focus, and your body becomes stronger. It's really a great way to.
You've got me psyched up. I'm going to start a fast tomorrow.
Yeah.
You got me so psyched up about it. I've been starting and then stopping. But hey, so some of these more high tech drugs that we got here, the ones that have like such a huge benefit, but are like, prescription locked, that you kind of have to do that to get it. How do you facilitate those patients getting these drugs? Do you have a doctor that you can just say, hey, I think this is good, or they go to the doctor and then say, I want this, and prescribe it? Because there's things like that I feel like people want to like, or need to ask for before they get, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's really what sets the practice apart, that I'm happy to prescribe these things as long as they're safe and effective, especially, things that are FDA approved. At our practice, we're not doing any research at this time. That may change in the future. We may facilitate research studies. But at this time, if it's FDA approved and if it's appropriate for the patient, then I'll prescribe it.
Now, tell me about the adaptogens that you have in some of these stacks, the rhodiola and the ginseng. Yeah. What is their main function for these people? Why were those added in? And why aren't they more medically recognized as such energy-giving, chi-boosting tonics?
There's a lot of different adaptogens out there. There's a lot of different nootropics that I use. Again, focusing on research. The sad thing is that there's a lot of Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicines, a lot of things that are well known to work, but they haven't been researched, right? And I think that's the biggest issue. I also think that while there's tons of money to be made in the supplement industry, it's not something that pharma can make money off of. And so they're not really inclined to fund research to show that they're effective.
Good point.
That was the second part of your question. The first part of the question, ginseng, I really, really love. Both ginseng, rhodiola rosea, bacopa, ashwagandha, they all have tons of different effects in the body, which I like. And really, it's a lot of, math on my end.
Really? You do quantitative stuff? Tell me about that. Is it one preface question with these blood tests? I know you got to get some baseline data, right, to be able to figure out where you're at. Do you do like a CMP, MAG, or what do you do for blood testing to say, here's where we're starting and then here's where we want to be? And how does your math factor in? That's very interesting.
Yeah, so I have a standard panel of blood tests specific to men and specific to reproductive age females, different one for post-reproductive age females. Of course, I don't deal with children, different scope of practice there. And it's individualized. So if someone has a known history of, autoimmune disease or something like that, or if they have a lot of family history of cancer, maybe we'll do some genetic testing with it. But that standard protocol allows me to do like DNA phenome age testing, which is 2 different calculators for an estimated biological age without having to do tissue samples. mortality risk, insulin resistance, and of course, the benefit of the Methuselah Protocol is that I've also been able to gather data on the measures that are not just specific to what's quote unquote normal or what's not currently dying. Like you usually get back those ranges from LabCorp Quest and they say this is fine, but that's including people that are ill. It's including people that are 20 and 70.
Can you give an example?
Sure. So like standard cholesterol, the general consensus is that total cholesterol must be below 200 to be safe. But more research is showing very solidly that a safer range is a little bit higher than that. And it depends on whether you're male or female, and it depends on your age range. Why that is not 100% known, but it's suggestive, probably because, lipids are where your sex hormones come from. So you don't really want them to go too low.
Last question. Ben and I were kind of mentioning this in the chat, but there's this Bryan Johnson guy, right? Big money. He spends it all
so much
on
media
getting
lately.
healthy.
It's great. He's bringing so much attention to longevity.
Yeah. Is the Methuselah in any way influenced by Bryan Johnson's blueprint, or do they share any similarities, or have you looked at it?
I actually did just look at it a couple weeks ago. Similarities, sure. I mean, some of the things that he's taking, I may prescribe for some clients. Not affected. Our protocol is completely separate. Again, it has to be research based. So looking at someone's stack isn't going to influence me. A lot of clients come to me and they're taking like 100 supplements a day, and they probably will not be needing to take that many things because things interact and things may have like the same purpose or completely opposing purposes, or just be too much for your body to absorb or maintain long term. Like I know some people are really, really dedicated, and that's fantastic. But when you're taking like 100 pills a day, that's also a lot of like vegetable cellulose in the capsule, and that's a lot of filler. And my goal is to find the things that are going to be most effective and not go too crazy.
That's awesome. You're awesome. I'm loving this.
Yes, indeed. And you raise a good point, Danielle, about interactions among medications and supplements. And of course, the more medications or supplements one takes, the greater the risk of some sort of adverse interaction. So what do you do to check for that or monitor for that? And do you find any common issues that arise, especially for health conscious patients who may go overboard in terms of how many substances they take?
Yeah, so that's a tough one because it's very individual, right? When you're building a stack, you have to make sure that you're not taking too many antioxidants in too high a dose, because some antioxidants will become pro-oxidants. For example, vitamin E, it's a really common one. It's great for men's health. It's great for prostate health. It's great for immune. It's a vitamin. It's great. You need it to survive. But more research is showing that if you take an excess of vitamin E for a long period of time, it can actually raise the risk of certain cancers and make prostate cancer, if already existing, it can make it progress faster. So it's important to, in my opinion, of course, I'm biased, to work with a provider who kind of knows these things and can guide. Other really common ones would be like magnesium or vitamin C, which are great, but if you overdose, you'll get diarrhea. So that's an easier one to titrate individually, but it's like anything else. Food is a medication. You can say philosophically, tea is a medication. Obviously, these supplements are medication. Just because they're not FDA approved doesn't mean that they don't have interactions and doses that are optimal.
Yes, and those are very important points. Now, our friend Rudy Hoffman wonders, what is the relationship between you and SENS? Of course, SENS is Aubrey de Grey's approach, Strategies for Engineered Negligible Senescence. And my understanding is the same as Rudy's, that there is a connection there, since you spoke at the Longevity Summit in Dublin, and you're collaborating with the Methuselah Foundation, which Aubrey de Grey co-founded back in, I believe, 2002. So if you could perhaps talk about how the SENS approach and the aspiration to reach longevity escape velocity through damage repair has influenced your work and your thinking.
Sure. So I'm not directly associated with SENS. I'm associated with Methuselah Foundation. But that's definitely where the connection came from, was my association with Methuselah Foundation. I am very excited for all of the research that SENS is doing to produce interventions that I can then help people use. I think that is very, very exciting for me. There's so many companies out there, for-profit, nonprofit. The longevity movement is exploding right now, which is why I say what we can do today versus what we can do in like 10 years. But it's also making it available to people. And right now it takes like between 15 and 17 years for research, things that are evidence-based and approved, to actually become available and part of a traditional medical practice. Yeah.
Yes. And this is an important point as well. This is an issue that we in the U.S. Transhumanist Party are trying to address, because the pipeline between the discovery or development of a safe and effective treatment and its actual availability to consumers is far too long. And we know Aubrey de Grey has an ambitious view of when longevity escape velocity might be attainable. He thinks between 13 and 15 years from now, if the current pace of progress continues and there continues to be funding and public support and public interest, we could, in theory, reach medical treatments that could actually reverse biological aging. But then, of course, making those treatments available to the broader society may be a challenge because of regulatory obstacles. So we do need to, first of all, individually stay healthy and as youthful as possible for as long as possible, because that time frame for age reversal is uncertain. So I don't know if I will get it when I'm 55 or when I'm 80, and I would rather not miss the chance to get it when I'm 80. So I want to be a healthy 80-year-old. And I think it's very important to also figure out ways to help anybody from whatever age, from whatever baseline of health they're starting, to get to that point. So I'm very pleased that I was able to hear your presentation at the Longevity Summit Dublin in 2022. That was the event which inaugurated the LEVF, the Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation, where I sit on the board of directors. And we're very pleased that you were able to come. And of course, anybody who was at that event thereby showed their commitment to being on the cutting edge of longevity medicine and helping advance both the science and the patient care sides of that endeavor. So we really appreciate that. Now, our viewer Ampero has a question. He wonders, is carbonated water an acceptable alternative to regular water? And of course, there are many different types of carbonated water as well. There's just the regular mineral water or seltzer water that people could drink. There are also carbonated sodas, and some sodas are sugar-free. They're 0 calories or pretty much 0 calories. So what is your view on those in terms of their benefits or any concerns from a health standpoint?
Yeah, so there's maybe you guys know this, maybe you don't. I've heard this old wives' tale, which is that carbonated water hydrates you quicker. That's not true. I mean, really, it's just water with carbon dioxide in it, right? It's very palatable for many people. So for individuals who have a really hard time hydrating, I love it. Cons is that it can speed up tooth decay, it can wear down your enamel quicker, and it's also not a great idea for people who have gastric reflux. So a lot of people will drink carbonated water to get gas out, but it's creating gas on both ends. So not a great idea for someone who has digestive issues. Maybe worth trying for someone who has slow gut transit. So people who have issues with constipation might be worth trying. I don't have any research to that effect. But I would say, sure, carbonated water is an acceptable alternative, but maybe limit it to like 12 ounces a day. What I do, I love carbonated water. I'll mix 1 can of unsweetened carbonated water with my regular water to equal about like 112 ounces a day.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Danielle. And I would be interested to hear you mention something that you told us before we went live, which is that non-alcoholic beer could actually have certain health benefits, and it is carbonated as well.
Yeah, that was kind of a fun one for me. Obviously, alcohol is generally not great for you, but non-alcoholic beer can actually boost your glutathione by like 10%. By 6 times, which is really fantastic. Glutathione is really important for mitochondrial function, for cellular health, nutrient sensing, energy use in the body. It's really hard to get. I mean, people will do like IV drips, and that's pretty effective, but ingesting glutathione, it's rapidly destroyed in the gut, so in the stomach. So if you're taking like glutathione supplements, that's not super effective. Much more effective to instead boost your body's own production of glutathione. So yeah, alcohol-free beer boosts it.
Excellent. And perhaps for those people who enjoy the taste of beer, but either want to transition away from alcohol or don't want to consume alcohol in the first place, as is the case for me, for example, this could be a major selling point in favor of alcohol-free beer. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometimes you want to have something that's not water. Sometimes you want to have something that's flavored or engaged socially. It could also, with the boost of glutathione and the sugar, the carbohydrates in it, could be an appropriate pre or post-workout drink, which would be kind of fun for many people. But at least definitely the social interactions, that's a huge part of longevity we're finding is engagement, whether that means being with people, engaging with people, learning new things, basically having the desire to live is really important for longevity. And for many people, having something to do with other people is important.
Yes, indeed. So it's great that you emphasize the social aspect of longevity, and a lot of people have been focused on that in recent years. There have been observations, for instance, that people in long-lived communities tend to have robust social networks, people who can help them, for instance, if they experience any health issues. I know, for example, that in the Hispanic community in the United States, average life expectancies are higher than for the general population, and it's not because they have fewer health issues than the rest of the population. It's because they have very strong family structures and generally robust social support. So if people need help, if they need assistance in their later years, they will tend to get that kind of assistance.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, having worked with geriatrics for so long, I can absolutely attest that for many people within a couple years of retiring, their health really, really tanks. And I think that's multifaceted. People a lot of times will have healthy habits built into their life that they've built their whole life. They have a specific way of eating, a specific way of drinking. They can't drink alcohol during the day. They have to walk to and from work. They have to engage with different people, different perspectives. But it's also feeling productive. It's also having a reason to show up every day. And when people stop showing up, then they start engaging in other behaviors that aren't great for health, like just sitting in front of the TV or not learning anything. And so many times we look forward to retirement as the time when we can do whatever we want. We can learn new skills. We can work, but in the way we want to. But for many people, it has an opposite effect and they begin to deteriorate. So I would say social engagement and definitely continuing to stay productive. If you're going to retire, if you're getting close to retirement age, before you retire, have a plan for what's going to keep you going, whether you're going to volunteer or what you're going to do with your life and not just like leave it open-ended to see what you want to do day to day.
Yes. Yes. I think it's important to note that retirement should mean that one does not feel the pressure to work for money anymore. It does not mean that one should stop working or cease being intellectually engaged, cease having projects that are very rigorous and structured. It just means one source of pressure has been taken off, but other intrinsic motivation would need to replace that. And we have a comment from Ampero who writes, health is a cultural thing. If more people adopt healthy measures, more people not adopting them will be inspired to adopt healthy measures. So hopefully we can cultivate a healthy culture in the course of this conversation. And now I would like to ask Ben Ballweg if he has any questions.
Danielle, I suppose I would ask, what would be like on the lowest cost end of something that would still fit within the Methuselah Protocol, supplements that call it are less than $1 a day? I guess I am a big proponent of fasting. It doesn't cost anything to not eat.
It's like a reverse cost.
Right, exactly. What's the cheapest way that one can get away with a Methuselah Protocol hybrid kind of arrangement?
Sure. So probably the cheapest would be to do a 1-year membership. I very, very strongly discount the protocol for a year. And that's mainly to help improve outcomes. The research shows that when people follow up regularly, the quality of their life, their quality of their health outcomes is significantly more. So it's $350 a month if you're doing month to month. If it's for a year, that's $2,200, and that includes 2 sets of the lab work to see where we're starting, to make sure that things are going along as they should, and adjust as needed.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Danielle. And I also wanted to see if David Shoemaker had any questions for you.
Oh, I always do. Thank you, Gennady. Couple of questions, actually. I myself am a professional at being retired. I've retired at least a half a dozen times by now.
Tell us your secrets.
I always had thoughts of what I would do with the retirement, and I found that there were just other ways that were more productive and more satisfying than some of those, let's travel, let's do the usual kind of things that come out of retirement. So I'm motivated that way. And that kind of gets to my real question, which is in motivation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm motivated more by certain things than others, I assume, like everyone else. I go through periods where my motivation for physical exercise, for eating regimens, which I know are right. I take a significant number of supplements that have been fine-tuned for me through a dietitian, coach, genetic testing protocol. But what it comes down to, though, is me sticking to doing those things that I want to do. And I've been trying various ways to do that. And I consider myself maybe more motivated than most. So that's a big issue. So counseling, coaching, accountability, give us some ideas how we wire those in and keep us steady.
Behavioral science, right? So coaching accountability is a big part. Having someone that you have to talk to, not in a negative way, but who's there to kind of support you. Positive reinforcement works really well for human beings. So I'm not there really more for accountability, but more for like, great job. You met your hydration goal one day this week. And then honestly, people are much more motivated to receive the positive reinforcement and to feel like they've earned it. It is super hard. Motivation is something that every single person struggles with. And I also personally connect with that and I understand that. And so it really is something that I appreciate, because as a provider, I really want people to improve their health. But the time that they're with me is like probably, I don't know, the math, 2.2% of they're weak or something, you know? It's all the choices and the behaviors they're doing when they're not with me. So when people are able to make a difference in their life, and I mean, it's their choice. They don't have to do any of this, you know? So it makes me very happy for them. And so I think that they feel that. Behavior modification is also something that you can kind of hack. If you don't want to do something and it's hard, you're definitely not going to do it. So kind of bundling behaviors is something I like to play with, like do a little workout every time you go to the bathroom, you know, do 20 squats and do 20 push-ups on the counter. You're already in there. And if you have a hard time like taking your vitamins, stick it next to your coffee, although not optimal to take vitamins with coffee, maybe better than nothing. Go to sleep in your gym clothes, take a pre-workout that's going to give you energy that you then have to use. Do little things that will make it easier for you versus making it harder. And also sometimes it's helpful to keep like a journal specifically around a behavior you're trying to change to see the barriers. Because a lot of times we're just living and we're just letting life happen and we don't really notice the things that are getting in our way.
Do you see a future for incorporating into your practice tracker technology? I mean, we have things like MyFitnessPal out there. We have smart watches. We've got a lot of different things that we can use. My frustration is that they don't talk to each other, and I can't incorporate them into a dashboard that I can look at that's in my face every day saying, you did great here, but maybe not so great over there.
Yeah, so actually that was something that I spoke to a bunch of different people at the Dublin Summit about, which is getting a platform that will have everybody talking together and then HIPAA compliant, be able to share it with me. And also, you know, the people who are using these, the purpose of data tracking is to give them something to do about their data, right? To improve. And that's just not the way they work right now. And same thing here right now, I'm in Montenegro at a longevity retreat as the provider here. And so trying to catch up with different things like Humanity is a great longevity app. And they're really, really trying to get enough data to then make it a better app, make it more meaningful, more research-based. But yeah, I think it's just going to take time. It's going to take more users, more technology. I hope it really needs to get there because it's not right now. And that kind of makes a lot of the wearables useless, especially from a provider's perspective, the amount of time it takes to go through. I love it when, you know, my clients will use MyFitnessPal and I'll go through all the data, but it takes up a lot of my time. Same thing with their wearables. I really, really want to know how their workouts are, how their, you know, VO2 max, their heart rate recovery, all these fun things, their gait speed. But trying to go through all the data for me is very time consuming. And for the general public, they're not going to know what to do with the data themselves. So it's kind of pointless.
Have you learned anything with your earlier patients that was maybe unexpected that you then use to modify your protocol for later patients? And do you, this data with them, are they participating in any sort of study when they're in the Methuselah Protocol so they can help develop longevity science with their data, or is it like siloed?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, we're not doing any studies, any research. I mean, there's always the possibility of us doing retrospective studies if people want to participate in that. But we haven't, you know, done that at this point. It's just a matter of really good documentation so that we can go that route if we do decide to in the future. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I learn from every single person. I learn from their experience. I learn from their response. I learn from their life. Yeah, absolutely. I'm always learning. And I think that's an important thing. I mean, you definitely don't want someone who's just going to be stuck in amber, not improving also. One big thing that I've noticed is the difference in men and women. Of course, this is anecdotal. This is not research-based, but the difference in men and women with different like nootropics. It seems like most men seem to respond really well to Bacopa and most women seem to respond really well to rhodiola rosea. So, I mean, we trial it. That's not 100% the case, but it does kind of lead my decision-making when two people are coming to me for the same issues that a certain supplement is designed for. deciding which one might be better to start with.
Yes, thank you, Danielle. And we have some good words for you from our friend and Northern California liaison, Celeste Castaldo, who writes, "Thank you for your cutting edge practice and support of a holistic approach in longevity medicine. Excellent presentation." And Celeste, by the way, is a healthcare practitioner herself in the Bay Area. So she tries to apply some insights of longevity medicine in her work. And of course, our friend Skip Siddiqui, who brought us together for this salon, is also in the chat. And he actually is writing that he has had a son recently, and that motivates him to also make healthier decisions for himself, and that his son was listening to you very carefully, Danielle, before he was even born. So perhaps he has an edge on all of us.
Hopefully the world is very different by the time he's old enough to be thinking about these things.
Oh, yes. I mean, if he has been born just recently and Aubrey is even remotely correct in his time frames, then he might even reach adulthood at the time that longevity escape velocity is already a reality. And what a wonderful life that would be, assuming we get past this pandemic, assuming that we can avoid nuclear war or societal collapse from other causes. It would be quite a wonderful life. And I would say, with these caveats, the later one is born, the better one's chances are. But of course, we need to work to avoid all of those pitfalls that could derail our progress. And this is why we are here. So Jason, you have a question, so please go ahead.
Yeah, it concerns the culture idea. And Pero, I think in the chat, mentioned something about this, that it's cultural based, and I think I would agree with that. And I mean, if we think about it, like if McDonald's food was like super healthy for you and would, I mean, people would eat at McDonald's anyway. So, it's not really about the, it kind of reminds me of this, like if you would ask my uncle, how do you like your steak cooked? He would say, for me, That's why I like the whole idea of this protocol, because I don't know, guess we're lazy, maybe. It's really nice to
survival mechanism.
yeah, and it's really nice to have that spelled out for us, and I think having that this culture would be beneficial, because then it's not such a weird thing. I mean, if I seen the stuff about Bryan Johnson in the media lately, and a lot of them are making fun of him. You know what I mean? And it's sort of like, and I didn't really understand that. I mean, why exactly is the guy weird because he's taking a bunch of vitamins? I just didn't get it, But I'm wondering, along with this culture, if we're building a good culture, what happens when somebody just plain old fails? I mean, it's like, what if somebody goes all in and even spends all the money and everything, and they just fail at it? I mean, how do we we probably don't want to, like, give them too much guff about it. What do we do in that situation? I'm guessing that some people might have a little anxiety of whether or not to even start the program, because it's like, geez, what if I do this and then I just fail at it? I mean, and then if we're having all these wearables and our data is getting tracked, then it's cool to have that data in your face because it helps motivate you. But what if it's in everybody else's face? And then it's like, oh, yeah, not only did I fail, but all my buddies know I failed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's where Having a provider who's there to support rather than judge is really important. The client that I gave the example of where, in a month she less or more than halved her blood glucose, she's like 70, and I would say her compliance was probably at like 60% over that month. Is that optimal? No, but it's what she could do, and it still had a huge effect. I think that the real danger comes from people feeling hopeless. That's something that I do see in people, that they feel like they're fated to have the same diseases as their parents and grandparents, that they can't do anything, that anything they do won't work, and none of those things are true. Genetics is just one small piece of the puzzle. The life we've lived so far is just one part of the puzzle. Making change at any point is going to have a measurable positive effect. Maybe it'll take longer, maybe it'll take more effort to make those changes. The later in life we make change, the more effort it will take to change those behaviors, and potentially the longer it will take for your body to recover, but it's never too late. I mean, I would say probably at this point, science says death is too late. But as long as we're alive, we can make a change. So there's no failure. There's no failure. There's just trying and improving.
Yes,
well, that's
indeed.
cool. I hope we don't, I hope we don't ostracize the ones in our community that fail. So.
Yes, and I don't think we do, because a lot of people in our community are advocates of cryonics, and cryonics doesn't really discriminate based on the cause of one's legal death. I know, for instance, our friend Rudy Hoffman is a great proponent of cryonics, and he helps many people get signed up for cryopreservation arrangements. So I think our goal in our community is to save as many lives as possible, no matter where a person is, what that person's prior history or choices may have been. We consider life to be infinitely more valuable than a person's non-existence. So ideally, medical technologies in the future will enable the reversal of any sort of ailment, whether now or going forward. And we have our friend Dan Elton, our Director of Scholarship, joining us. So welcome, Dan. I'm going to ask you to think of a question, but before you ask your question, let's go to Art Ramon Garcia for his question.
Yeah, I've been dealing with COVID long haul for quite a while now, and I believe I got infected in 2019, December, with the original variant. And supposedly the people who got that original variant have the worst long haul symptoms. And it sort of snuck up on me. It wasn't like till March of 2020 when I started to have trouble hiking. And but before that, I think I was having brain fog, and I went to my doctor and I said, "Hey, I can't focus, so I think I got some atomoxetine, some sort of ADD drug, in order to just get to my work day." But even now, I was feeling really good mid last year after I took a cold shower, and that seemed to snap me out of it. And for 4 months, I was feeling great, like it was over. But then I think I got reinfected on Halloween. And I'm back. I kind of lost a lot of those gains, and I'm back to doing, feeling the chronic fatigue and the brain fog, and drinking tons of coffee just to make it through the workday. There were days when I just go to Walmart for a very short shopping trip, and it feels like I ran a marathon when I get back. And I'm still dealing with this, and I really haven't found any solution. I've tried all sorts of things, and coffee is kind of what gets me through the day. Just tons and tons of coffee. But one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, the advantages of fasting is looking at my glucose meter. It takes about 20 hours to get into ketosis. And well, I got to sleep somewhere in there. And I sure as hell can't sleep if I'm either using caffeine to suppress my hunger or trying to sleep with, my belly growling. So is there any way to suppress hunger that doesn't require using caffeine so that I can actually do a 48-hour fast?
Yeah, that's a fun one. Yes, potentially. I mean, there's certainly lots of medications that suppress hunger, but I would not recommend starting a medication just for the purpose of a side effect of reducing appetite. There are some supplements that reduce appetite, not enough to measurably reduce weight, but anecdotally enough to kind of take the edge off. Zinc is one that can actually produce nausea if you take it on an empty stomach, which is how you should take it for best absorption. Caffeine is a really great appetite suppressant. I would say that my issue with coffee is that it's also going to, deplete your dopamine. So it can cause a pretty nasty crash. You could take L-theanine with it, which will help to offset that, the jitters and everything. It might be worth trying to switch to like green tea or white tea that has less caffeine, more L-theanine in it, and actually more appetite suppression with green tea than with coffee. And see, kind of cut back on that caffeine withdrawal effect. I am probably not a great source for that because personally I can drink like 10 cups of coffee and nothing the next day, and I don't ever seem to have problems with caffeine withdrawal, but it can be pretty gnarly for people. People do fast with caffeine. You don't necessarily have to do a water fast to have some of the positive metabolic effects.
I'm actually taking tomorrow off just so I can start a caffeine fast. I only work weekends, and I'm planning next week to just
Nice.
what's it, white knuckle it, or whatever the term is.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like your body doesn't want to not have food those first 2 days. It's kind of ingrained in us that we're supposed to kind of sustain life by regularly eating. So yeah, honestly, those first couple days are sometimes challenging. Staying really busy, staying active, physically active really helps. Drinking a whole lot of water really helps. Doing a mineral supplement really helps, especially with the side effects. I mean, you probably know as well, Zach, like, potential of headaches and cramps. You can definitely offset that by some mineral supplementation. Having a partner, sometimes that makes it worse. Depending on who the partner is, sometimes it makes it better.
All right. Thank you, Danielle. And now let's go to Dan Elton for his question. I think Dan might be frozen. So while he unfreezes, I will ask a question with regard to fasting. So one of the concerns that I have about fasting is that at least fasting too long might lead to the consumption of muscle rather than fat. And in particular, I've heard experiences of people whose cardiac ejection fractions even decline somewhat significantly because of more intensive intermittent fasting. So I'm wondering how much fasting is safe if one really wants to preserve one's cardiac muscle in particular, or just whatever muscles one has built up through training. One doesn't want to lose those, but one might be interested in some intermittent fasting. How much of it would absolutely not endanger those muscles?
Well, I would say probably no amount of fasting would absolutely not endanger muscles because it's individual. I wouldn't speak to the medical aspect of it without working with an individual, and I would recommend only fasting with, the guidance of a medical professional. But as far as biology goes, right, intermittent fasting is going to have different biological effects than extended fasting because most people aren't going to get into significant ketosis with intermittent fasting. So you're not going to have that boost of human growth hormone, which helps to preserve muscle to the same effect that intermittent fasting would do. Your body still is going to prioritize fat loss versus muscle loss because that's also built into us for survival. Most people losing weight, losing body mass, are going to lose about 1 pound of muscle for every 2 pounds of fat. It's offset a little bit with intermittent fasting, definitely offset with muscle fasting. Excuse me.
All right. So while Danielle is away, we do have some viewer comments here that I will highlight. And The first one is from Celeste Castaldo. She mentions that green coffee berries are one of the highest antioxidant foods on the planet. So for those who are interested in antioxidants, this is an idea from Celeste. Our friend 50OAS writes that Russian culture is a lot more receptive to longevity interventions, and Luis Arroyo points out that in the USSR, this was in the 1920s, Alexander Bogdanov tried to institute a program of blood transfusions. He thought those could cure certain diseases. Unfortunately, he died giving a blood transfusion to a student of his, and he got infected in the process, but he saved the life of his students. So this was about 95 years ago now, and it's interesting that there is that cultural background. Certainly from a historical standpoint, that is quite fascinating. Now it looks like Danielle is back, and Dan Elton is back as well. So Dan, let's see if you can pose your question.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was just using my MacBook, and it just froze randomly, even though I was on a hardwired connection. So I don't know what was going on, but I've been listening in, and I heard a couple people bring up the topic of long COVID. I wanted to share that I have also experienced long COVID. I had a very bad case where I actually was unable to work for about 5 months, and I was off of work for 3 months. And it's a very long story, but what I believe is that the reason I'm much better today, I'm still not fully recovered, but the reason I'm much better today is that I started sort of a graded exercise therapy. And also I started looking at more as like a psychosomatic thing eventually. So I'm really curious what your experience has been with long COVID, and also, the related condition of chronic fatigue syndrome, and what you think about exercise in particular, because something like graded exercise therapy is extremely, quote, controversial. I don't think it's controversial in the established medical community, but it's very controversial in the long COVID and chronic fatigue communities. So what has your experience been, and what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that both anecdotally and the research is showing that exercise is really fantastic for boosting the immune system, boosting strength, boosting motivation, boosting happiness. Exercise is pretty fantastic. But for many people who are coming out of chronic illness, and especially chronic illness that's going to affect ability to exercise and exercise tolerance, starting slow is really good. So many times with clients, I will limit their exercise to 10 minutes a day, low intensity, and describe what that would be. And that's kind of dual purpose. One is to limit injury and help their body regain the ability to exercise slowly, particularly, like blood to the brain. If you're changing position a lot, those receptors in your blood vessels that tell you to change your pulse and your blood pressure kind of stop paying attention if they're not in use. So that's where people get lightheaded if they're exercising too intensely, too quickly. But it's also good for motivation. It helps people to feel like they're winning, and they are. It helps people to stay on a plan versus jumping into something that's going to be potentially damaging to them and not going to be realistic for them either.
Yeah, the way I kind of summarize it is that I think at the beginning, like at the first 2 weeks after you have COVID, you should definitely not exercise, because you're very likely going to get some kind of pushback or post-exertional malaise. But after, say, 3 months, I think if you're just laying around all the time and and you have anxiety about exercising and you're not exercising, I think that's very unhealthy. And it surprised me how quickly I physically and mentally deconditioned when I wasn't physically active, or just wasn't very active. So yeah, that's kind of how I think about it. Otherwise, I think everything you've been saying basically makes a lot of sense. I trying to think if I have any other questions. I'm curious. I also want to make a comment about tracking, because I was wondering if you ever see cases where people get tracking too much, and they're starting to worry about false alarms and things. Because I see this personally with, for instance, sleep tracking, and there's research showing that some people who use sleep trackers, they end up developing so much anxiety about their sleep that then they start getting insomnia, and I think it can be, for some subset of individuals, it can be kind of unhealthy, because whenever you're using a tracker or a sleep tracker, then you're never going to see like a perfect sleep pattern. And for certain personality types, that can be kind of anxiety provoking. And then they start obsessing over their sleep, and as soon as you start worrying about your sleep, then you typically don't sleep as well. So
that's absolutely why,
like that, because I think they call it like orthosomnia.
That's absolutely true. That's true also for respirations, for pulse. This is why generally, if you go into the doctor's office, they're not going to tell you when they're counting those things because we self-adjust. That's true of sleep as well. For some of the things with tracking, both for outcomes and also for tolerance, like continuous glucose monitoring, for most people, you don't really want to do that for the rest of your life, right? It's really, really helpful if you're going to be making a change in your life. Same thing with sleep. If you're trying to kind of test things out on yourself, it's really helpful to have those data points, but it's not necessarily something that you want to or would be good to do all of the time. And also to your point with,
I think as transhumanists, we like the idea of feeding our data into computer and having all this data, but if the data is very noisy, it can provoke unnecessary anxiety, obviously. So that's kind of the point of why I brought that up.
I think we need to take
that goes back to what I was saying about earlier about somebody having anxiety that they don't want to fail. I mean, it's like, especially if they're investing all this, and so if there's a way to where they could be sort of part of the program, but yet not really worried about it, I mean, if you just put like the right pills in front of somebody and like, oh, hey, go walk around the block or do this or do that without having all the other details, that might maybe, I don't know, be better for them. Because, I might, have some of that anxiety going on about, nobody likes to fail, especially a perfectionist. I'm not saying I'm a perfectionist, but Dan was saying, I imagine, some people who are like perfectionists, that would really eat at them.
Yeah, absolutely. That motivation is really important. And I think that's why it's very important for me as a provider to make people feel accepted and make them feel supported, not to make them feel judged, so that becomes less of an issue. Many times people have negative experience with healthcare or the roles that people assume we're supposed to fill. And I think pretty quickly people will realize that that's not going to be really helpful to outcomes. And at the end of the day, it's the choice of the client if they want to see me or not. So I really want them to enjoy it and to see benefit.
Yes, indeed. And Dan, what you observed in regard to exercise and a graded exercise approach when recovering from long COVID is quite important. And it's important from a psychological perspective as well. So after I tested negative for COVID, approximately 8 days later, I decided that I would run in a race, a 5-kilometer race. And that's on the low end for me historically. And I thought I would run it a little bit more conservatively since I had recently had COVID. So that was a 25-minute 5K. Of course, my standards were very different back then. And after running that race for 25 minutes, I noticed that 19 of those minutes were in my peak heart rate zone, kind of in the high 170s or low 180s. And then they took like 2 hours to go back to kind of the normal range, what's medically considered the normal range between 60 and 100. And I had not had that happen before. And that alarmed me because it was quite unusual, and it led me to really restrict my exercise for months afterward until I had gone through the full array of non-invasive cardiac tests. However, when I got my cardiac MRI and it came back clean with no permanent damage, no scarring, then I felt more confident getting back into exercise. And I found that the first time I did a significant run, a 10K run fairly slowly, my heart rate was higher than I would have wanted it to be. But then pushing through that in subsequent days, the heart rate normalized and my resting heart rate actually began to decline after exercise instead of increasing. So it made a big positive difference for me to resume exercise 6 months after I tested negative for COVID, but doing it a little more than a week after testing negative was detrimental. So there is that difference.
You were also in relatively good shape. I couldn't walk more than a block for several weeks, and I couldn't walk more than a mile for several months. And even today, I can't run more than, say, a mile, whereas prior to where I had COVID, I was running 5 miles, 6 miles. So, you know, these things are all relative. And it sounds to me like the problem you had, Gennady, was, and not so much, well, it sounds like, you know, maybe you waited, if I had to guess, maybe you waited too long well, from my perspective, Gennady, you actually jumped into exercise relatively quickly. And what my concern is that there's been a lot of scaremongering about exercise. It sounds weird because we all intuitively know exercise is good. But if you go and read about long COVID support groups, they actually recommend against exercise because of the risk of this post-exertional malaise. And I think there's some truth, to that, but it's also kind of dangerous because it makes people anxious about exercising, which is not a good place to be in. And as far as whether post-exertional malaise is a real thing or just some psychosomatic kind of more, I don't want to say anxiety related, but psychosomatic thing. It's hard to really tell. I mean, there's some studies on VO2 max that seem to show it in chronic fatigue patients, but there's really no evidence that, say, someone who has had COVID and then has long COVID, that it's dangerous for them to exercise at 3 months, for instance.
Well,
I think
do we
And
really
that's kind of
even
the point
understand
that I
what long COVID
amazing,
is?
but you know, it's an incredibly controversial area because the chronic fatigue people have been trying to basically say that long COVID is a type of chronic fatigue syndrome and therefore exercise is dangerous.
I think it's also comes down to kind of semantics of cultural understanding of what the word exercise means, right? Like even in traditional medical practice, people are supposed to exercise during COVID, right? We're supposed to exercise our legs. We're supposed to do lung exercises to prevent clots from forming. And similarly, when, recovering from bacteria or a viral infection, some level of activity is absolutely beneficial. It's just a matter of how much, how frequent, how intense, and that has to go based on tolerance. So if you're able to walk to the mailbox, then that is exercise for you. You just maybe do it a little more frequently, start to pick up the pace as you're able to tolerate, and wait on a 5K until you're able to. But, in Janata's experience, you did what you could. And that's a great opportunity to learn where the boundaries are. But of course, you don't want to push yourself beyond what is good for your body at the time, which is, I think, where data tracking is really helpful. Because maybe if you hadn't had your tracker on, and there's been a couple other patients like that too, where they're like, wow, my heart is basically, I'm tachycardic for no apparent reason. They felt fine, which is scary. You want to know, we want your body to tell you what's going on. But that's where the data tracking can be really helpful in preventing damage.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm really glad that I did avail myself of some detailed tracking. So I have a Fitbit Sense 2 here. I have a Garmin Phoenix 5X here. And actually, it helps me to use both of them, because then if I get a strange heart rate spike on one of them, I can check it against the other to see if it was an artifact or if it was real. I also purchased a device, and this one is a bit pricier, $400 for Frontier X2. It's a monitor that one can wear on a chest strap. It measures heart rate, breathing rate, heart strain. It also can do a live ECG. Now, it has to be positioned in exactly the right way to provide an accurate ECG reading, but it's helpful for people who want to monitor their heart rhythm, though it doesn't give really an interpretation of the heart rhythm, but one can share the rhythm strips with a health practitioner. And it did help me to have multiple sources of data, again, to alleviate any concerns that might have arisen from a faulty reading from one device. But I recognize, especially for people who want to make exercise a lifelong habit, and that includes vigorous exercise, it might not be practical to be wearing 3 trackers and then use other apps as well. And we had a virtual Enlightenment Salon with Nikki Olson 2 weeks ago, and she has studied in great detail some of the limitations of the fitness trackers. Like, she put some Fitbits and Apple Watches on chicken legs, and those chicken legs registered a heart rate, which is interesting and a bit, I think, instructive, that one should take these measurements with a bit of a grain of salt, not try to let them dominate one's life. But on the other hand, having some information is very important. Now, Jason, you have a question, so please go ahead.
Yeah, this is kind of for everybody. I'm not sure if anybody knows, but do we have any data on like what exactly long COVID is? I mean, do we even really know that yet? Kind of seems like if we're talking about whether or not we should be exercising, we should have good data about what it is to begin with before we even answer this other question. Intuitively, and I don't know if this is true, but intuitively it would seem to me that if you had a very heavy viral load and a lot of damage caused by the virus while you had it, then that could tend to be maybe some, form of long COVID or whatever, because you have damage that you're dealing with then. But I don't know. I mean, what is it? Do we really even know yet what long COVID is?
I think that in general, there are many things that we're probably never going to know the full story, especially with different strains and things, different symptoms. At the very least, I mean, your immune system is very reactive. Many people experience fatigue is probably the biggest one, but aches and pains, hair loss, tingling and itching of the extremities, changes in nail development. I mean, it's a lot. Now, to be kind of devil's advocate, any virus can cause a similar syndrome. Generally speaking, with the COVID, it's like way more pronounced and much more prolonged. But of course, there's definitely more research to be done there. Hopefully we stop having data points and maybe it remains a mystery, but people stop getting sick.
Yeah. I want to just
about the exercise. Isn't that metformin good for that if you can't exercise? I thought I heard that somewhere. Is that true?
Not to my knowledge.
Or is it rapid mindset?
I think one of those
decreases
the benefits of exercise. I think genetics.
So, I mean,
or something
it
like
depends
that.
on like what benefit of exercise you're talking about, right? So metformin is a really good calorie restriction mimetic. It's really good for a little bit of weight loss, mainly weight maintenance, helping nutrient sensing, helping stave off insulin resistance, reducing risk of all-cause mortality. Rapamycin, when used for longevity purposes, is a really potent senolytic, gets rid of senescent cells. Many of these things will have similar effects in the body in terms of reducing all-cause mortality, having perceived youngness, changes in blood measurements similar to exercise. But I wouldn't say it's an exercise replacement by any means. Exercise is definitely its own beneficial thing.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment about Jason's question, just because I happen to have researched long COVID a lot, and then I have a different question for Danielle regarding long COVID. I think it's different for every patient, and I think it's probably multiple different things going on. There's multiple. In some people, it could be latent virus that is just keeping their immune system active. In some people, if they had severe COVID, then maybe it could be organ damage. I don't think that's the majority of people, though, if I had to guess. And then the other big one that really was eye-opening for me is Epstein-Barr reactivation, which I think is probably something I had, because I actually had ringing in my ear and I had extreme insomnia in August. And both of those are kind of associated with Epstein-Barr reactivation. And anyway, and then I'm actually working on a fairly detailed blog post that goes through kind of a more psychosomatic theories. There's been a lot of people talking about how there's a similarity between long COVID and something called functional neurological disorder, where basically the software and wiring in the brain gets conditioned in a bad way, and then you kind of have to retrain it. So yeah, it's probably multiple things. Please look for my blog post, which I'm hoping to publish in the next few days. I kind of wanted to maybe change the subject and just ask a different question, which is about risk factors, because I've actually done some work on using existing CT scans to give risk information for cardiovascular disease. And so I was curious, what kind of risk factors do you look at for like cardiovascular disease? And also, like, how do you communicate it to the patient? Because if you just say like you're higher risk, I feel like that doesn't necessarily say a whole lot, you know?
Yeah, I think, I think everybody is worried about cardiovascular risk, right? It's like #1 killer of people, whether it's by aging or at younger age, but certainly over 35, highest risk factor. So most people come to me already kind of like thinking about cardiovascular risk. I think that there's a predisposed bias that more patients self-select that have family history risk factors and are more concerned about their health because of that. As far as communicating risk, I think we try to focus more on what to do about things rather than the risk itself. I mean, lots of people have lots of risks, probably things we don't even know about. And genetics is only one factor. Lifestyle is another factor. Thankfully, lifestyle things we can generally change, sleep apnea is a huge one. Family history. Most people worry more about their family history than they need to. Not exercising, Western style diet. Overweight is another big one. Smoking, of course. There's lots of things. I mean, even, exposures in youth. So we go through their personal history in really, really deep detail. even before people see me, they fill out a really overly detailed form, but that's a good starting point for us. Then we can go into more detail in the conversation. Like the first appointment's usually like an hour to figure out where we need to target things, if we need to adjust the blood tests or not, if we need to go see a cardiologist, and see where we're focusing so that we actually start from a place of knowledge.
Yes, and Dan, I would be quite interested to read your post once you've prepared it, and we might even do a salon just on your research, because I think it's extremely important to share with people information about long COVID, the different potential causes and potential ways in which people could manage or perhaps overcome the condition. I think there is a lot of merit to the psychosomatic aspects of it, at least once one has been able to rule out significant organ damage, because many people who get long COVID have mild acute cases of COVID, as was the case for me, for example, when all throughout my time when I was actively infected with the virus, I could work at about 75% of my normal capacity. I could take walks in the neighborhood, do work around the house, and I didn't feel like it was that much different from an ordinary cold, but there were these long-term effects. And it was interesting that these specific kinds of effects that I was especially worried about, and I was especially worried about catching long COVID of the cardiovascular variety, were what happened to me. And I can tell you the symptoms are very real, but to what extent is it some sort of dysregulation of the nervous system, where the nervous system sends the wrong signals to the heart or to the lungs or to other organs? That's very interesting to consider. Now, a few commentators in our chat, including Celeste Castaldo and Art Ramon, mentioned the role of sleep and the possible restorative role of sleep. Danielle, could you speak a bit more to that in terms of the extent to which getting adequate sleep can help with perhaps overcoming certain conditions like long COVID, as well as normalizing other markers of health?
Absolutely. You know, I'm actually preparing a whole separate PowerPoint on just the lifestyle factors that add up to a longer life. And yeah, I would say that sleep is a huge, huge point in living longer. And it's not just about sleep itself, but it's also rest and recovery from exercise. I don't think it's necessarily news to people. There's so much information about not sleeping too little and not sleeping too much, but also the quality of sleep, it being uninterrupted, not snoring, not having sleep apnea, feeling like you're getting good sleep, good quality sleep, which isn't necessarily just about REM cycle sleep, not awakening middle of the night, which as we get older becomes more and more challenging. Not waking up to use the restroom, not waking up because of pain, not waking up because of stress tends to be kind of a younger person's concern, or being able to fall asleep quickly. There's a really great questionnaire. It's called the Pittsburgh Sleep Questionnaire, I believe. But it's a really, really great tool that anybody could use. Definitely a medical practitioner can use to assess the quality of sleep. Timing of rest is really important, especially for people who are more athletic, making sure that their muscles are recovering well enough to support healthy cardiovasculature and also muscle regrowth. So you're not like exercising to no avail. You want to make sure that you're actually getting the benefits.
Yes, absolutely. And it's interesting. A few months ago, I heard Kevin Parrott speak about this. Kevin Parrott is one of the SENS advocates. He is on the board of directors of the SENS Research Foundation, and he said, exercise is great for you, but what is great about exercise isn't actually the acute phase of the exercise, which breaks the body down. It's the recovery afterward, which helps to rebuild the muscles and other parts of the body that get worn down, but they're rebuilt better than they were before the exercise.
Yeah.
And for me, of course, longevity is the goal. It's not to set records in a particular sport. It was nice before I had COVID to know that I could run significantly faster at 34 than I could at 18. But at some point, there are diminishing returns to that, and they come faster than perhaps most of us would like. And interestingly enough, you mentioned that at 35, cardiovascular concerns come to the forefront. And for me, it's kind of a coincidence that the long COVID symptoms happened at 35. And I became very familiar with some cardiologists. And one cardiologist and electrophysiologist told me that there is essentially a golden mean in terms of exercise as well, in terms of the long-term effects. And people who exercise too much are also likelier to develop arrhythmias later in life. So in terms of longevity optimization strategies, in terms of maximizing the benefit of exercise, not for short-term performance, but for being able to live a healthy life when one is in one's 80s or in one's 90s, what would you say is the best exercise regimen, if there is such a thing?
Yeah, so that's actually a really interesting point. The whole question of the golden range of exercise, that U-shaped curve, it's still a hypothesis. It's called the extreme exercise hypothesis, and that's because it's not proven. There's absolutely research showing that people who are extreme endurance athletes, meaning that they are engaging in really excessive, high intensity workouts for a long life, and now they're like 75, higher risk of arrhythmia, higher risk of certain cardiovascular problems. But the research study showed that that was like in excess of 2,000 hours, which of course, that's cumulative, but you do kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. I would say that for the majority of population, you don't really need to worry about overexercise. Some people would potentially. Having a clean bill of health is a good indicator that that's okay. Generally speaking, you want the WHO, the cardiovascular associations, 150 hours per week of moderate intensity, or 75 minutes of high intensity exercise per week minimum. The research at least shows that a minimum of 4 times that amount is still safe. And that would be the equivalent of like almost 2 hours a day of moderate intensity exercise. So that's a pretty decent amount. Of course, intensity is also individual, right? Like if you're running 5 miles a day, 5 kilometers a day at 8-minute miles, that's going to hit different to someone who's never run in their life. It's going to be less intensity of exercise. You want a variety of exercise for aging. You want something that's going to help your cardiovascular endurance, aerobic and anaerobic. You want something that's going to build strength and muscles. You want something that's going to build agility, flexibility, balance, mind-body connection, like hand-eye coordination, brain telling your body what to do, things like choreography. Dance are really great. You want a lot of variety. Ideally, you'd want something that does breath work too, maybe.
Yes, thank you very much. And this is all quite good advice. It seems that an active lifestyle, of course, is extremely important. Having that variety and having it be proportional to what one is capable of at the moment is very important. But of course, you're right that most people have issues on the other end of that scale. That is, they need to get the motivation to exercise more frequently and do more different kinds of exercise. And hopefully some of what we've discussed today, particularly the motivation aspects, the cultural aspects, could be brought to bear to help with that. So we have about 15 minutes left in our salon, and I wanted to give the rest of our panelists the opportunity to ask any final questions or make any final comments that they would like. So who would want to go first?
I'd like to jump right in and say just exactly what we're talking about in the chat here with talking to a doctor before starting anything. I think people are to a point where they kind of need to be responsible with their own medicine, know what's going on, because there's so much going on that doctors sometimes they're so busy in their clinical practice that they aren't keeping up with like the most current research. So I would wonder, how would you suggest people go about finding a GP that will listen to their needs and actually want to work with them on conquering this problem of aging and death, and like have the, audacity to confront the Reaper? Because I think a lot of doctors are not willing to do that.
Yeah. I would say, I mean,
Great
I
point.
would say with me would probably be the easiest route. If that's not an option, then I would say,
I'll give you my credit card.
I would probably give them a test. I think you're absolutely right. And that's why I wanted to make Everest Health different. Build in the time for myself to stay up to date, because I have to, but that's not what our society requires. When it comes to continuing education, of course, people are going to choose the thing that is cheapest and quickest, not the thing that is most useful, because they don't have time for anything else. And that's what working with the insurance world results in. Unfortunately, working with insurance means you can't really do preventative medicine. You don't have time to actually take care of people. You don't have time to continue learning. And those are all things you want in a medical provider. I have other clients who have tested their general practitioner that's more local to them, for clients who are living out of state or out of country, to see if they're willing to work with me, if they're willing, take a research study and then see if they've read it the next time you see them, or say, I would like to have these lab tests drawn, and give them your argument and see if they'll do it. A lot of providers won't even do lab tests, which is
like MRI is like the most magical machine, and it's, it's hard to get a scan though.
Yeah, it's not even like radiation. It's very frustrating.
Right. It's completely safe. It's completely non-invasive. Well, provided one doesn't have metal implants that are difficult to remove. But I actually have a lot of direct familiarity. I would say be careful about getting permanent implants, because you might need an MRI and you might need it sooner than you think. But in my case, the cardiac MRI was essential in giving me the confidence to resume a normal exercise regimen, because if I did have some sort of scarring or myocarditis, I would be inclined to be extremely conservative with my physical activity. But knowing that I don't have that led me to think that my long COVID was most likely nervous system dysregulation, in which case the exercise was beneficial in training my nervous system to act more normally. But I have to fight with my insurer right now in order to get it to cover the cardiac MRI, because I was told that, coverage was denied retroactively, by the way, because their criteria for affording coverage is, get this, heart function of less than 40%, and the person has to be a candidate for heart surgery, heart transplant, or a pacemaker.
They wait until you're about to die and then do the most expensive stuff and approve it, instead of at the front end doing the cheap stuff that's preventative.
Right. That's going back to the issue with regulations and insurance. It's something that we need to change on a much bigger scale, but having clients that are demanding more, changing what people expect of longevity, of health, of the paradigm is going to be important, because they're going to get away with it for as long as they want to, as long as they can.
Yes, absolutely. And I think having medical practitioners who work outside of the conventional health insurance system is extremely important in giving patients other options. One reason why I was able to react so quickly to my long COVID is because I have a concierge physician, and he is a local doctor whom I pay $250 a month. He doesn't take health insurance. This is in addition to my health insurance, but he can respond to my emails. He can prescribe medications. He can order lab tests for me, and I can get them done the next day. And I think it's quite worthwhile for people to explore that. I understand it's a bit more of an out-of-pocket costs, but in terms of benefits to one's health, if one has even a bit of extra money to spend, I think the long-term value of that can be quite significant. So yes, and Zach, you make excellent points in regard to how the conventional health insurance system doesn't really allow a lot of people to get the benefit of good diagnostics until they're already at death's door. So who else would like to make a final comment? Jason.
I would just like to echo that point of Zach's earlier about the finding a GP, because I'm actually exactly in that position right now. My longtime doctor moved into a more administrative role and just isn't taking patients anymore. And so I have to find a new, GP. And I mean, geez, what do you say? I don't even, I'm gonna have to have this meeting, and I'm like, hey, I mean, how do you? Because I don't want to be like, hey, there's all this research, and then have the person not know nothing what I'm talking about, and now I just embarrass them or something. I mean, how do you navigate that? I don't know. I don't know if that was a question, but I'm just saying. It's tough.
Doctors need to be open nowadays to the fact that the amount of research that's available to the public is expanding rapidly and drastically and dramatically. So they need to be not humble in a way, but just open to the fact that they might be talking to someone that's more up to date on what's going on than they are. Maybe not overall and with the comprehensive view that they have, but with one specific thing. They may have read the newest study and said, hey, this is really solid research trial here, and of however many hundreds of people, and these results show this. What do you think of this? And not have them get their ego kind of in the way and go, I'm the doctor.
Yeah. I mean, we should be so thankful to have patients who are actually trying to take care of their health, that are actively involved and responsible for their own health. Like, that's a dream. Absolutely. And of course, wanting to learn. I mean, it should be that we got into this career to help people, and because of a great passion for life and for learning, we should be so thankful to have people who actually help them.
Yes, indeed. And now I'm wondering if David Shoemaker has any closing comments or questions.
Well, on that last topic, I've considered myself my general contractor when it comes to medicine for quite a number of years, and I've actually had pretty good results with that, interviewing doctors that are willing to look into the type of things that I do. And actually what it's taken a cadre of subcontractors, if you will. I have a person that's kind of my lead go-to guy, the general practitioner. I have someone that is instrumental in hormone replacement, and someone that's instrumental in, unfortunately, pulmonary. I ended up too with long COVID and lung scarring after also having the original COVID virus back in March of 20. But I've been able to enlist all these people to assemble the things that I need. And at least in my one data point, when I approached them, they were all happy to have somebody that was interested in their health, instead of just coming there to be patched up or to pass it off onto the medical staff to have it done. So I would encourage people to get out there and talk to people, and maybe your experience will be similar to mine. And if it's not, shake the ones off that won't talk to you, and other ones are out there. So I'm really happy that we've had our guest today that's been able to spotlight these issues and talk so positively about the things that we can do for ourselves. And thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Yes, indeed. And I would like to echo that, Danielle. We learned a lot today, many actionable insights that we can apply to our own lives. And we also discussed the connection between these kinds of personal health improving behaviors and the broader societal and cultural context of pursuing longevity and what can enable longevity. Ben, I'm wondering if you have some concluding questions or comments.
I don't know, Danielle, if you want to squeeze in anything about hormesis and how that could be used within the Methuselah Protocol, or other things that you recommend or do in your own life.
Yeah, I think that anything is on the table as long as there's science behind it, as long as there's research to show that it's safe and effective in humans, not just mice or gnats. I'm open-minded, and I have to be, because the research is always changing. There's always new things out there, which is very exciting. So yeah, I'm happy to consider anything.
We've talked a lot about some life-extending therapies here that could be considered what we would consider a little bit of lukewarm term that's called health span, where we're talking about extending health span. One thing that the USTP stands for is promotion of an indefinite lifespan, which gets more into the future. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, Danielle. Are you seeking LEV yourself? Do you imagine you might become some sort of immortal being like many of us do?
I certainly hope so. I think that I kind of ride both sides of the coin of being a little bit pessimistic of where things are right now, but I like to live with the presumption that I'm going to live forever, meaning I have to build these connections with other people that I'm going to be with forever. I want to, prepare the earth for me to be on it forever, prepare my mind for me to be living forever. I think that helps me today for sure. And I very much hope that it'll help me forever.
You're an inspiration.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, as humanists, that being good to each other, it takes on a whole more meaning when you're going to be with them forever. If you were going to be with them forever, you better start learning how to get along now, man,
Yes, indeed. So Danielle, we always like to leave the last word to our guests. So what would you like to tell us in the next 2 minutes or so, perhaps to round out the discussion, or mention anything additional that the audience would benefit from?
Sure. I just want to really thank you guys for your time, for your attention, for helping me as well. I've learned a lot from you all. You're an inspiration as well. And it's a pleasure to be able to chat with people who are so like-minded, who care about their health, care about the future. And I hope I get to see you in person sometime soon.
Yes, indeed. Likewise. And thank you to our panelists today for a great, engaging discussion. I think we covered a wide range of matters that are important for maximizing health. Thank you to our audience, as always, for the excellent questions. We are a community of people who really wish to reach longevity, escape velocity personally, not just have it be attained in some hypothetical future of humankind, but we want to live these open-ended lifespans. So in the spirit of that, I hope that every one of you will continue to join us every Sunday at 1 p.m. U.S. Pacific time for the U.S. Transhumanist Party virtual Enlightenment Salons. And I hope that we can all live long and prosper.